Good morning. Welcome to the Field Crops Virtual Breakfast. I'm Sarah Zeiler. I'm an educator down in Hillsdale County by the state line, and we're so happy to have you here this morning. This morning, we're going to hear from Dr. Brook Wilke. He is the Associate Director at the Kellogg Biological Station, and his main focus is on the long-term agroecosystem research. He's going to be talking to us about cover crops after wheat.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here and share some things about cover crops. It's time to think about that if you've had wheat in your fields or possibly oats or canola or other summer harvested crops. And it's an important topic because it's an incredible window of opportunity to make gains in your fields in soil health and other characteristics that cover crops can bring. If we're leaving our fields bare during warm and wet time periods, we're usually going backwards on soil health. And so trying to go forwards at the same time as trying to avoid unintended consequences that could arise if you're not careful with your cover crops that I'll talk a little bit about. And this year I thought I'd just give you some of the about five of my favorite or five kind of cover crop options that target different scenarios or different goals that we might be after with cover crops. So, there's a lot to think about when you're doing cover crops. On the surface, you might think, oh, cover crop, like, oh, I'll just go plant something out in the field, which it can be that simple. But most of us that have grown cover crops know that you really have to think about all these things because it matters for how, like, what benefits you're going to get, and also maybe how you can get yourself in a little bit of trouble if you're not paying attention. So, what's the goals? Cover crops can bring a lot of goals. I mentioned soil health as a big one. You know, if we're putting green plants back into the fields, it's gonna be good for soil health. We can get some nitrogen if we're growing legumes. Controlling weeds, I think, is a big one after wheat. Pests, erosion, growing cattle feed or sheep feed, enhancing pollinators, or making your fields just look good because sometimes cover crops can be beautiful. But we also have to know what's the next crop in the rotation. How will the cover crop potentially influence that crop? And there's a lot of options coming after wheat in our state. And then, just as importantly, what's your plan to kill the cover crop? And make sure that we can get it killed in a timely way so that it's positively impacting the next crops in rotation and not negatively impacting them. So, what are we dealing with this time of the year? I think that's an important thing to think about. Sometimes after wheat, if you're right on top of it and you have a really clean field, you can get right out there and plant your cover crop and just get it growing and get ahead of the weeds. But in most cases, we typically have something like this picture I'm showing where you've got some wheat stubble, the field's pretty clean, but there's a few other things starting to come up. And soon there's going to be some volunteer wheat coming up as well. And these weeds, once they get started, they're gonna at least persist with the cover crop and produce seeds and so forth. So I think that controlling these weeds is pretty darn important. I know Michigan is variable in how much rain we've had and what the soil moisture is like, and perhaps your straw residue is gone because you harvest it, and sometimes we have a lot of straw residue left. And you know what? We're tired too. If you're a wheat farmer, you've probably spent a lot of long hours late in the day harvesting the wheat and getting it in the bin and dried. And so, what's your energy like to get things done? Or do you just need a break too? So think about all those things. Just a brief credit to Christy Sprague and team for providing some information on what we can do to kill weeds with herbicides after wheat and before cover crops. Herbicides that are a pretty good option include glyphosate or glufosinate. Sharpen or Enlist, 2,4-D products can also be used, but carefully depending on the cover crop species. And then some people may prefer tillage pass to control weeds and prep the soil again for the cover crops. But here's a little table that Christy and team presented or prepared to show which herbicides are safe for different types of cover crops. And you can see that Roundup and Liberty are pretty safe for almost all the cover crops, whereas Enlist 1 or 2,4-D products, you want to be careful around rapeseed, rape, or other brassicas, and definitely don't put it before if you're going to try to plant legumes. And then Sharpen works to burn down small weeds pretty well, but it's also pretty hard on broadleaves, the brassicas and legumes. So just be aware of that when you're planning your herbicide burn down. Okay, let's go through a few good options here for cover crops to get you prepped. Red clover. Um, Perhaps some of you already have red clover out in the field. It works really well as a frost seeded cover crop. Put that on when the ground is still frozen or right thereafter if it's dry enough in March, typically in Michigan. And the wheat comes up and grows and does its thing. And then the clover grows up after the wheat's harvested. You can see some pictures of some of our fields on the right where that's the case. Um, and it's most of the time reliable. If it gets dry in April, sometimes the clover can die. Now, that doesn't mean you can't plant clover after wheat's harvested too. And drilling in a shallow way this time of the year works pretty good, but it's not. If anybody's tried to plant alfalfa or clover in July or August, it can be a little bit iffy, especially if it gets a little bit of moisture and then dries out. Sometimes those seedlings can die. But you can still put it out there, and red clover can fix a lot of nitrogen. We're growing some pretty good corn with only 30 to 75 pounds of nitrogen to the corn after a good red clover cover crop. And so there's a lot of nitrogen credit out there. One thing I want to bring up is Berseem clover as well as a newer option in the marketplace. It's a little bit faster growing than red clover and maybe a little bit more reliable to plant in the summer months. It's also known as Egyptian clover. And we're starting to do some trials where we're mixing it with red clover to try to hedge our bets with clover. And we're learning about that. Berseem can be a little bit more expensive than red clover, possibly even a dollar 50 more per pound. And so you want to be judicious with it. There's some varieties coming up that are more expensive than, let's say, VNS or older varieties of Berseem. And so maybe start mild if you're going to start in with it. Another good option is, and probably used by a lot of farmers that are growing wheat, especially in sugar beet country, is oats and radish. And you can see that the picture I'm showing, kind of the middle strip on the screen, is oats and radish planted after wheat. And I like a rate of roughly 30 pounds of oats and 3 pounds of radish, which should cost you about $20 per acre in seeds. Radishes know that there's about really two different types of radishes on the marketplace for cover crops. One is called an oilseed radish, and the root doesn't get real big on that one. And the top growth is a little bit more. And those radishes, there's some varieties that are particularly known for suppressing or trapping sugar beet cyst nematodes. The other radish is more of a daikon radish, and it's typically marketed as a tillage radish. And there's a picture on the left side of my screen, or you can see one of those growing down in the residue. They grow really big. Seems like regardless of the conditions, you can plant it in a mixture, you can plant it by itself, and they grow these big roots that poke out of the ground. And they're quite tasty too if you want to try them. Double crop of sorts. So really good option. It will winter kill this mixture, and then you'll have a pretty clean, really nice soil bed going into the spring. Overwintering mixes can vary, and I bring up one option here where you can mix annual ryegrass at roughly 5 pounds per acre, 3 pounds per acre of crimson clover or Berseem clover, as I mentioned before, and about a pound of rapeseed or dwarf Essex rape or canola or whatever you can get your hands on. That mix will really fill in and cover the soil. The annual ryegrass is a is really good at tillering and filling in the space. Most of those species are winter hardy through a lot of our state, at least. And it's a really good soil building mix. Just a lot of roots, a lot of growth, a lot of green material. It won't get real tall, but it will just kind of get thick. Um, that said, you need to be aware if you're going to grow annual ryegrass or rapeseed for that matter, that they can be a little bit tricky to kill with herbicides. Annual ryegrass, a lot of times what happens is we get a little bit too much of a hurry to burn it down in the spring, and it just doesn't die very well if it hasn't grown very much in the spring compared to cereal rye, which will pretty much die anytime you spray it as long as you have good spraying conditions in the spring. Annual ryegrass, it needs a little bit of growth. I've been told, I don't know if this is 100% true, but don't spray it until you mow your lawn for the second time. So what happens sometimes is people spray it too early, it grows back, and then becomes a weed, especially if you have non-GMO crops that you can't come back with Roundup, or or if you have wheat in your rotation a lot, it can be difficult to kill in wheat. And so you got to be careful with it, know what you're doing. And rapeseed can be kind of similar in terms of killing it, trying to spray it too early. So just know what you're doing there. If you're concerned about annual ryegrass, I think winter barley is a pretty good option to substitute. It's grows more like rye or wheat, but I think it's a little bit more leafy and tends to tie up less nitrogen than rye, at least as long as you terminate it fairly early. If you want to go for maximum biomass from your cover crop, try something that has sorghum Sudan as a base. It grows incredible. We can get up to like 5 tons per acre of sorghum Sudan growth after wheat. Uh, and you can mix other species like millet, sunflowers, soybeans. Uh, Sun hemp is the yellow flower that I show on the screen here. It wouldn't hurt to add a little bit of nitrogen to it, 30 to 50 pounds per acre if you really want to help it grow more. If you're not concerned with maximum growth, don't add nitrogen, but you can if you're really looking for forage or other maximum growth. And then last but not least, you've probably heard this term of a cocktail. So basically refers to a big, diverse mixture of species. And these can be all different sorts of things. The picture on the right, I'll show you what species are in this mix, courtesy of a farmer friend and colleague. And I think there's 17 species. Uh, Seed suppliers are good at helping to build these mixes for farmers depending on goals. You know, do you want to graze? Do you want to overwinter? And so forth. But ultimately, you can be creative and just start throwing a lot of things out there. And we know that adding more diversity in fields does help to improve soil health faster with more diversity. And so be creative. Here's this mixture that you saw the pictures of. There's 17 species. I'm not going to talk about all of them. It's not that critical that you have to have all of these, but the particular mixture, just so you know, has 17 and it's planted at 38 pounds per acre and it costs about $39 per acre. So you can customize that to how much money you want to spend, what you want in it. And then finally, just a few tips to keep in mind. If you're trying not to break the bank, but you want to get some seeds out there, you don't have to go with the full seeding rate that a supplier recommends. You can cut your rate by 50%, or go 25 or 50% less, and you'll still get a decent cover crop out there. You do need to plant seeds this time of the year. Surface broadcast, if you incorporate it, you could probably get away with it, but just surface spreading probably won't work this time of the year because of our variation in rainfall. And then if you've got animals or if you've got a neighbor or friend that's got animals, harvesting cover crops for animal feed, certainly a way to cash in on some value of it without really affecting, you still get a lot of benefits of the cover crop, even if you cut it. And sometimes you can actually help the next crop by getting rid of some of that residue before planting the next crop. Okay, that's what I've got for you today. I'm happy to be here all morning and answer any questions or chat through or provide some, if you're curious about prices of cover crops, I've got a price list pulled up from a supplier. So happy to chat over the next hour or so.
So, George asks, Brooke, do you have any comments about buckwheat?
Yeah, buckwheat I didn't mention, but is a great kind of all-purpose cover crop. It's a good nutrient scavenger. It hits a different plant family than what we're typically used to growing in our fields, and flowers really early, attracts a lot of pollinators. You can get it for $1 to $1.50 a pound, and it works. Should winter kill, but it also reseeds itself pretty easily. I'm not real familiar with possible conflicts with other crops in rotation, if anybody, but it would work well mixing with oats and radish and or just a monoculture cover crop. So it's a good option and a quick grower.
Thanks. So if we put together our own crop mixture, is it possible to have too many species in a crop mix? Do you have any other advice about building mixes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think you can have too many species except for if you really want something to show up. If it gets diluted so far, then you just might not have very much of it. So, if you really want sunflowers, but you have a 50 species mix and you only have, 10 sunflower seeds in your whole field, that's the only reason to skimp down that I'm aware of. But otherwise, like we have so many seeds accumulated at the research farm, and so we often just plant out like all the old stuff. We throw it in the drill, go plant it out. Could have anything. Corn is the funniest one that people see. Like, why are you growing corn out there? It doesn't look very good. But it's hard to go wrong unless, watch out for things you don't want, or watch out to make sure you get things that you really do want. That's the major thing.
Um, so is there any cover crop that deer don't like to eat?
You know, most of them that we grow, the deer will eat. I haven't worked much with, I'm curious about industrial hemp as a cover crop. I don't know if it's legal to do that yet. I haven't followed it exactly, but hemp that can be grown for fiber, the deer won't eat it. And so I've been curious about that one as a possible cover crop, but I'm not quite sure yet how well it would work. So most of the other ones, the legumes, the brassicas, the grasses, the deer seem to chomp on them. That said, the sorghums generally can grow through the deer pressure. The deer might nibble on them, but if you grow sorghum or millet, typically you'll get a pretty good growth without the deer doing too much damage.
Right. Next question. Is there information on variability of cover crop responses across the heavier soil along the thumb versus the lighter sandy soils?
Yeah. So this is a good question. I was reading this and thinking about it, and I think that yes, but it's not entirely predictable. So is a scenario. I've seen the same cover crop mix planted at our research station in two different fields or two different long-term settings. Maybe one that's had, organic management and one that's had no-till management. And you plant the same mix on the same day, and the different species in the mix can grow very differently. So you might have one that's dominated by legumes, and you might have one that's dominated by grasses. And so I think that not only can the geography of our state play a role in which cover crops are successful, but the management practices, the soil health status, the nutrient content of the field will impact which cover crop species do best. I think in almost all cases, the cover crops will survive and grow. It's just which ones do well in your particular area. And so I think it's more than just where you located, but it's the specific context of the field as well. And it's hard. I don't know that we have enough information to fully predict, exactly what's going to happen, which is why I like some mixtures because you know that you're hedging your bets a little bit that you're going to get something when you plant out a few different species.
Do we know, let's see, how many days before the local Hessian fly date can we plant wheat and expect it to be viable next spring?
So if we're talking about wheat as a grain, um, I I don't know if Dennis or anybody that knows wheat a little bit better than I do is here, but my experience has been that wheat, the Hessian fly is not the biggest problem. It's aphids that's the biggest problem with planting wheat early because they carry viruses. And so we're seeing more and more viruses with early wheat planting in and around or before that Hessian fly date. Going earlier than that probably just gives you a continued more higher risk. As a cover crop, it doesn't matter that much unless you're worried about some sort of carryover of the insect to another crop, which typically we're not too worried about. Um, but it could cause a problem in some scenario that I'm not currently thinking about.
Um, does any specialist want to speak up about that?
Yeah, this is Manny. I can make a quick comment. So at least I think from the grain production point of view, right? Haitian fly again is a pest, but we are seeing some reports. But the main issue with early planting is you can get too much fall growth, right? You can get a lot of tillering, a lot of vegetative growth, and that can actually cause issues with the survival through winter, and then plant spending more energy making the vegetative growth than later on going into grain. So you can actually get a yield decline if you plant too early. We are still looking at some research trying to see what happens if you plant, before the Haitian fly free date, end of August, early September. But I think there's some data from Ohio showing that, yeah, if you plant too early, you can get too much vegetative growth, and that can cause a decline in yield.
And this is Chris. Those Hessian fly free dates were developed like 100 years ago. I have no doubt that those dates are actually now perhaps even a little early, but they weren't based on degree days. They were based on like latitude or something like that. It's a strange. So Ohio State and I had talked about, actually Manny's colleague has a student that's we were trying to figure out how to recalculate those dates. And apparently I'm too stupid to know how to do that. So that's always been a troubling thing to me, is that maybe these dates are actually even a little too early from an insect perspective. And I would agree with Brooke. Aphids are by far your biggest issue. I've seen Hessian fly twice or something in my whole 30 years. So aphids and virus are kind of what's driving that.
Great. Thanks. Leon asks, he has some areas with sweet corn, which will be harvested soon, and he used atrazine and dual for weed control. Do you have a list that might have options for cover crops following harvest in August?
Yeah, so I haven't tested this exactly, but I do have a friend that grows sweet corn and uses similar practices and is fairly successful with oats and sorghum sudan and radishes after sweet corn, post dual and atrazine. And I guess going safe would mean using large seeded grasses and possibly large seeded brassicas like radishes as a bonus. But small seeded grasses like annual ryegrass would be more susceptible to the dual, and then small seeded legumes and brassicas could be affected by the atrazine. And so that's where you kind of it's so uncertain with sometimes with cover crops and your rainfall and your moisture and how those products have degraded. So go large seeded grasses to be safe.
Right. Lewis asks, can you plant sunflowers after sharpen? He has a problem with morning glories. So is sharpen the best choice for morning glories plus sunflowers?
I don't know if I haven't been involved in any tests with sunflowers specifically. Sharpen has a fairly short-lived residence time of being a problem. And so sunflowers being large seeded, I'm guessing that you could probably get away with it, at least, especially if you waited a week or so after spraying the Sharpen. You could also use Liberty or glufosinate if you don't want to use Roundup. That probably would also help kill the morning glory and would be safer for more cover crops to follow right away. And so I would, it's a hard one to know for sure, but I would assume you'd be okay as long as you give it a week or so with either product. But I don't quote me on that one. That one I'm a little uncertain.
Right. Um, the radish, they get large. Do they decompose over the winter so you can no-till into them in the spring?
Yeah, so the radishes will sort of like fossilize a little bit over the winter and spring and turn into kind of dry, crusty things and leave some cavities in the soil. And so you can no-till into them. They're not too much of a problem, except for that if you would plant right into one of them, there's a chance that a seed could go into that like old hole that the radish was in and possibly not get good seed to soil contact. And I wouldn't worry about it too much. This is probably going to be a minority of the cases, but if just so you know, that could be a possibility. But they otherwise they work great. They leave a great seed bed to plant into, except for that one potential microsite issue.
Okay. David shared some research he did on his farm where he tried some sorghum Sudan grass in some sandy ridges, and he said it grew pretty well. Last year, it ran out of moisture. Is fertilizer necessary for good growth after we on sandy or lighter ground? Um,
Yeah, so if the soil doesn't hold moisture, you're going to only be able to get so much growth, and fertilizer will only go so far. If you don't have water, fertilizer is not going to matter, and fertilizer will leach faster in the sandy soil. So, we run into challenges because we run out of nitrogen because we can't hold it, and then we run out of water because the soil can't hold it. And so it's kind of a dual problem that's hard to tackle together. So I wouldn't go overboard with nitrogen on those areas. I would just try to get as much growth as you can and maybe supplement a small amount. Um, so yeah, I don't know if
um,
that's great solutions, but growing something there is going to be important to try to build your soil. Yeah.
um, he's also saying it'd be nice to have a cover crop that was planted through the spring for dry beans to have wind protection in the spring from blowing sand. Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, if you can get annual ryegrass or if you know how to kill annual ryegrass, it's a pretty good overwintering cover crop that will provide a pretty good cover. Uh, or any of the other cereals probably are the best options to get you through the winter, and possibly clovers if you can get them established in that sandy soil is what I would suggest to be probably the best for those sandy areas.
Are there cover crops that we can plant later in the fall that will still be able to be established before winter?
So the best cover crops late in the fall would be the cereal grains, wheat, barley, rye, triticale, um, rape, dwarf Essex rape in the lower part of Michigan typically can be planted pretty late in the fall and still survive. And then there's some new work with camelina. That's another brassica that typically survives the winter, but we're still learning about it. And so there's a few others that you can possibly get going, but not get very much growth. So it's kind of the short list of late seeded cover crops.
Okay. Um, John asks, is plow down an added advance? And that's all.
Yeah.
Do you know what he means?
I'll take a guess that wondering if plowing down the cover crop is beneficial or can help. So possibly with residue management, if you're concerned with uh, too much residue. But most of these cover crops, if you've got a good no-till planter and you kill it ahead of planting, you can typically plant into them, especially with our corn and soybeans. And so it depends on, how much residue you can manage with your crop that you're planting, whether you want to till it in or not.
Do you have any recommendations for heavy clay soils for cover crops?
I work mostly in the southwest part of the state where we have loam or sandy loam and not a whole lot of experience with clay soils. So I'm gonna anybody else from the east side or other parts of the state want to chime in with any recommendations? My assumption is that a lot of the same cover crops would work, and the ones that are more deeper rooted, to help penetrate some of the clay and loosen it up a little bit would be beneficial, but I don't have a lot of direct experience to go on.
We see a lot of rye and tillage radish, but maybe Jenna can confirm that for me up in the thumb. But let's see. Brooke, which of your recommended mixes do you anticipate doing well when broadcasted versus drilled?
Well, all of them in the summer need to be incorporated. And so if I think all of them can be broadcast and incorporated, and all of them can be drilled. But as long as, drilling, if you have small drilling mixtures, you have to be careful of not putting small seeds too deep, right? So how deep should you set your drill when you're planting a cover crop mixture that has variation? I think probably like a half to 3/4 inch is a good target because deeper than that, you might bury like clover too deep. And then broadcast incorporate, you just get a little bit more unevenness. So you're going to get a little bit lower rate of success. But I think that all of them can be planted either way, as long as you get them in the ground some way.
Can you repeat the information regarding the types of tillage radish for cover crop mix with oats?
So there's two types of radishes basically. One is called an oil seed radish that has a smaller root, is a little bit more round. The plants stem from radishes that were used for or are used from oil seeds. And then the other type of radish is a tillage or daikon radish. They get the big long root, and you see them at the grocery store. They're called daikon radishes, and so those are the two different types. They both work. They both still have fairly deep root systems. It's just sort of that, what do you call it? The fleshy part of the root is a little bit different shape, and the oilseed radishes are the ones that have some specific nematode trap crop abilities, especially for sugar beets. Is not the daikon radishes or the tillage radishes.
Okay. Let's see. Manny made an announcement about pollination issues. Manny, you want to go ahead and shout that out? Or maybe Manny had to take off.
Yeah, I think Manny had to take off, Sarah. He
Okay.
made that in the comments. But if you're seeing pollination issues in corn, I dropped a link to Manny's comment to some of our team of educators and specialists. You can reach out to any extension educator, and we'd be happy to come out and see some of your pollination issues.
All right. And Jenna, did you say Jenna
Yeah.
had an announcement? Okay.
So if you're located in the Thumb area or you want to drive this direction with some, we hear there's a lot of issues with getting rid of deer this time of year if you have your permits, but you don't know where to take them. White Bartle, a farmer who's located between Peck and Brown City, will have 2 refrigerated trailers at his farm this weekend, starting today, running through Monday. So you can come drop off deer there. All of them are donated to a local food pantry. After the process, he says to give him a call ahead of time to let him know he's coming, and it's never too late in the evening to bring them. He understands by the time you get done farming and then hunting them and everything, it may be 11, 12 o'clock before you get there. He wanted everybody to know it's never too late. But to give him a call ahead of time. If you want any more information on that, feel free to get a hold of me and I can get you in contact with White.
Thank you. That sounds like a great opportunity. Marty says that there's an in-person seed treatment workshop in Southwest Michigan on August 18th, and there's 4 RUP credits. And the link to join that, to register for that, is in the chat. Or you can join online every Tuesday in August. Again, the link is in the chat. I think I got everybody.
One more question about triticale. How early can you plant triticale? Similar to the conversation about wheat, if you plant it too early, you're going to get a lot of tillering and growth, and possibly affect your overwintering ability. But as a cover crop, you can plant it anytime, really. If it's spring triticale, it will start trying to flower, right, and produce seeds. Winter triticale will just kind of grow vegetatively. And so depending on what you're looking for there, you could plant either. Just know what you're gonna get from each one.
All right, I'm going to open it up to any other specialists who want to chime in.
This is Chris here, just following up on our cover crops with Brooke. Just remember, if you have a grassy cover crop, true armyworm likes that for egg laying in the spring. And so it's not a reason not to use them. It's just a reason to be cautious and then go scout these fields early. This year we have a second generation or a late flight of true armyworm. It's just persistently hanging on in forages. So if you're chopping forages, you may see some, and most of them are dying, or you're smashing them or whatever. But they can march to like a neighboring cornfield. And if you're growing organic corn, you may see they've had some real challenges this year, depending on where they are and what flights that they caught. That's really driven by being kind of weedy, almost kind of cover cropping and weedy. So when they're big, boy, there's not a lot of options to kill them, especially if you're organic. You have, most products might kill some if you're conventional, but our organic guys, some of them are taking it hard this year in sorghum Sudan or corn from true armyworm, which is very patchy from the south. So use cover crops, but just be wise in thinking about the scouting bits.
Thanks, Chris. Any other specialists?
This is Hadish. A comment about cover crops and nematodes. I think all of the cover crops that were mentioned, they are good for soil health elements, but people need to be aware they are all hosts to one or other forms of nematodes, specifically the root lesion nematode, which is the most widespread one in Michigan. So when you're thinking about rotating the following crops, you have to think, especially if you have vegetables following or beans, that's the most damaging nematode that we have.
There's one question that popped up from George in the chat, Sarah, about
Yeah,
location
I
of
see that.
sunflower.
I think, George, do you mean Brooke's background with the sunflowers in it? Like where that's from? Or do you mean like where sunflowers are in the state?
Well, I know George. I wonder if he's wondering if he can come take a picture of them. But these sunflowers in my background are
Yeah.
from a few years ago. We don't have any sunflowers right now. We will have some actually at KBS in a cover crop mix, probably flowering by September 4th when we have a KBS LTAR field day. So, George, if you want to come down then, I bet we'll have sunflowers in a mixture at that point to take a picture of. So, otherwise, I don't have a field of them this year that I know of in the area.
Brooke, you mentioned the field day. Do you want to plug that real quick before we wrap up here?
Yeah, our KBS LTAR project, long-term agroecosystem research, studies how we can include a bunch of conservation and other innovation practices into including more crops and other innovations. That's September 4th. The registration should be coming out shortly, and it'll be in the morning with free lunch, and we'll feature topics like soil health, some pest control things in and around cover crops and other conservation practices. A lot of work with drones that we're doing, applying fertilizers and pesticides, and some other innovative cover crops and short corn varieties, so forth. So check it out if you want to come down to Hickory Corners for a day.
I'm going to take a chance to plug the North American Manure Expo. It's next week, the 30th and 31st in Fulton, Ohio, which is probably as close as it's going to get to Michigan. And so it's like right across the state line. And so if you are a user of manure or a producer of manure, this is a good match for you. It's a great time. All right. Thank you for joining us for virtual breakfast. We hope to see you next week, and you have a great week.